Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today we'll continue with our third topic of our first section, which is critical period hypothesis. We'll talk about the critical period in relation to first and second language learning. But before we start, we have a quick quiz like last time. We talked about 4 different theoretical views. So each one of these statements refers to one of these views. Which view suggested that language abilities appear due to complex interconnection between neurons, that child acquire the language through imitation, the speech adaptations make it easier for the child to acquire the language, and finally, innate structures are the only reasonable explanation for children going through the same stages at almost the same time. We have keywords in each sentence. First, we have interconnection and the neurons. Then we have imitation. We have speech adaptations, and also we have innate structures. They are so easy. So please try to answer them and writing the answers in the comment section. Then let's start with our lecture. Let's talk first about the critical period itself. It's the period during which certain behaviors or skills appear to be acquired with particular ease, speed and ease, and without external intervention. So it's a period which children acquire skills and behaviors, and in our case, language, easily and rapidly, and without external intervention. So without an external help from others, they seem able to acquire these things easily and rapidly. And this ability is not found in adults. Also, this ability was found in humans, so they called it imprinting. It's rapid learning in a young animal in which it begins to pattern behaviors on an adult model. In some cases, animals have been found to imprint on a human in the environment. For example, ducklings have been found to follow a moving object. This moving object may be a human, like we said before, that appears in their field of vision during a period of approximately 9 to 21 hours after they hatch. So animals imitate or pattern the behavior of an adult model. This adult model may be an older animal or a human in the environment. So this imprinting also supports the critical period view. So let's talk about the critical period hypothesis itself. First of all, it is the view that there is a critical period favoring language acquisition after which native speaker-like ability cannot be attained. So this view suggests that there is a critical period, which we talked about before. In this period, language acquisition seems to be easy. But after this period, native speaker-like ability cannot be attained. So if we want to attain or acquire a native-like ability, we have to acquire the language or learn the language during the critical period. So neuroscientists set the end of the critical period at around 9 years of age, suggesting this was due to a general cognitive inflexibility. So neuroscientists said that this critical period ends around the age 9 because the brain loses a part of its flexibility or neuroplasticity. So the brain doesn't function as it was in the critical period anymore. But Lindbergh said something else. He said the onset or the beginning of the critical period at approximately 2 years of age, and it ends at puberty around 13 years of age. So first they said it ends at 9, but Lindbergh said it ends at around 13 years of age, and he said that based on neurological and clinical evidence. Also, we have lateralization, which Lindbergh talked about, and he said also lateralization begins and ends with the critical period, so or vice versa, it's the critical period that begins and ends with lateralization, which begins at 2 and ends at puberty. So what do we mean by lateralization? It's a process by which cognitive functions become localized to one or the other of the brain's hemispheres. So the brain is divided into two parts, like we were seeing here. Each part we call it a hemisphere, and each hemisphere is responsible for different functions. So the left hemisphere, which is the blue one, is responsible for logic, science, sense of time, and language, which is our focus. And the right hemisphere is responsible for creativity, art, intuition, and imagination. So the language is lateralized in the left hemisphere. But we have other views that said something else. Not all researchers adhere to the CPH, which is the critical period hypothesis, to explain L2 and L1 differences. So several factors affect L2 learning success. These views say that there's several factors other than lateralization that affect L2 learning success. These factors include the quality and quantity of L2 input and the continued exposure to the L1. So as you see, also L1 affects the acquisition of L2, or that's what these views say. We have other views that considers that language acquisition skill is genetically based, and once it has been used in the acquisition of language, first language, it is lost, since it constitutes an unnecessary burden. So they consider that we can use the language ability just once. So we acquire the language just in our early years, and after it is used, it is lost. So that's the reason we can't acquire the second language fluently. But actually, there's another view that says that if the language acquisition skill is not used or exercised, it is lost. So language has to be learned continually. After learning the first language, we have to learn the second language right after it. So the language acquisition ability is not lost. We have to continually learn languages. We have also another view, which is less is more. This view has two parts. The first is children's more limited cognitive resources entail that they focus on smaller parts of the input. So, the children, because of their limited cognitive resources or comprehension ability, they focus on smaller parts of the input, like they focus on the morphemes, the content words, or things like that. But adults, due to their more developed cognition, tend to store larger, more complex units of input. So, what do you think is better than the other? Actually, the first case is better because children focus on the important parts of the speech, like they focus on the content words, the important words or morphemes in speech or in the language or the input they're exposed to. But in adults' case, they store larger and more complex units of input. They store like when like we say, they bite more than they chew. They can chew. So the children's case is better than the adults' case because the adults had acquire or comprehend complex parts of the input, but children only focuses on the smaller and important parts. We have one last thing to talk about, which is feral children. So, feral child or children is rare cases of children who have grown up in situations deprived of regular human interaction and normal language exposure. So, if a child is raised in isolation without human interaction or without exposure to language or human talk, these children won't be able to acquire the language like normal human beings. Because, as we said, it's a critical period. So, if the child tries to acquire or learn the language after the critical period, he won't be able to learn the language properly. I mean their first language. If they didn't acquire a first language, it would be impossible to acquire it after the critical period. You may know famous fictional cases of the feral children, which are Tarazan and Mowgli. Actually, they are cases of feral child because they were raised in isolation in the wilderness. So that's all we're gonna talk about critical period hypothesis. It was an easy and interesting subject for me actually. Hope you enjoyed it. So thanks for watching and see you again in the next video inshallah.